Hey ChatGPT. Today I'd like to talk with you about alienation. Please begin by listing the most important ideas and theories of other thinkers and philosophers on this topic.
Gladly. The theme of alienation is a central topos in modern philosophy, especially since the Industrial Revolution. It generally describes a form of distancing or separation either from oneself, from the world, from other people, or from a meaningful order. The most important theoretical currents and approaches include 1. Alienation through labor, classical Marxism. Labor, as the central human activity, becomes a source of alienation under capitalism. The worker is alienated. From the product of their labor, it does not belong to them. From the production process, they do not control it. From their species being, the creative nature of humans. From other people, due to competition, instrumental relationships. Core idea: the human being is treated as a means rather than as an end. Capitalism produces structural alienation. 2. Alienation as metaphysical unease, existentialism. In a world devoid of meaning, humans experience absurdity, emptiness, and isolation. Man is condemned to be free, meaning, he must create himself without divine or objective order. Alienation here means becoming estranged from oneself by being forced to play roles, e.g., an inauthentic life. The authentic life consists in confronting this alienation, not denying it, but overcoming it through freedom. 3. Alienation as a cog in the machine. In the modern world, purposive rationality increasingly permeates all aspects of life. Humans become part of an iron cage, bureaucracy, institutions, technical systems. Subjective meaning, wholeness, and traditional or religious embeddedness are lost. Result: humans live functionally, but emptily, as cogs in a machine. 4. Materialism and alienation. Technology no longer reveals the world as something that concerns us, but as pure resource, as something to be used. Humans lose their sense of wonder toward the world, living only in a mode of control and manipulation. This kind of relation to the world leads us to see ourselves as resources, objects to be optimized. 5. Alienation as cultural diagnosis, postmodernism and late modernity. In a world of hypercommunication, simulation, and constant self-presentation, e.g., social media, a new form of alienation arises. From one's own identity, performing roles instead of being. From real social relationships, replaced by virtual contacts. From reality itself, reality is a media construct. Alienation is no longer lamented, it is trivialized or even ironized. 6. Psychological and spiritual perspectives. Alienation as loss of contact with the self, often due to sensory overload, consumerism, or external pressure to succeed. Some spiritual traditions see alienation as separation from the inner essence or from the whole, e.g., the Tao, divine principle. Healing means a return to presence, to being, to simplicity.
I'd first like to examine whether the forms of alienation you mentioned are fundamentally effects of technology, or rather simply effects of division of labor and organization within large societies. I suspect that most of the types of alienation you just described have been a concern for many people ever since the agricultural revolution. Perhaps lies still align with human nature for Stone Age hunter-gatherers, but apart from the direct alienation caused by technology, no direct contact with air, rain, earth, sun, wood, stone, animals, and other people, humans have likely felt alienated for a very long time. The serf in the Middle Ages, or the servant or slave in ancient empires, were also cogs in a large machine, often derived no deep meaning from their labor, and probably rarely had the time, leisure, or guidance to marvel at the world or build a good connection to their inner self. And if they didn't truly believe in the religion of their time, they likewise lacked a sense of meaning in their existence and were just as spiritually empty.
Your hypothesis is highly plausible and leads to an important insight. Many forms of so-called alienation do not seem to be primarily technological phenomena, but rather structural side effects of complex social organizations, especially those marked by division of labor, hierarchy, and centralized control. Let's analyze this connection in 3 steps. 1. Alienation as a consequence of complexity and division of labor. With the Neolithic Revolution comes sedentary life, agriculture, storage economies, and with them planning, hierarchy, and discipline. Division of labor brings efficiency but also a loss of wholeness. People no longer do everything themselves but instead repeat partial functions. These partial functions often feel meaningless to the individual because the connection to the whole, e.g., to the community, the product, or a deeper purpose, is lost. Social closeness is also diminished. In earlier times, all members of a group were tightly connected. In large societies, anonymity emerges. This means alienation arises where people are no longer shapers of their own life world but merely functional elements in a larger process. This is particularly visible in technological systems, but it is by no means a new phenomenon. 2. Pre-industrial alienation, slaves, serfs, subjects. Medieval or ancient humans were often not with themselves, but rather externally controlled by class, domination, or coercive structures. The religious world order could legitimize this condition, e.g., God's will, but it could not always fill it existentially, especially not when belief itself was fragile. Here too, the individual is part of a vast machinery, feudal system, empire, church, that leaves little room for individual meaning or self-realization. The difference from modern alienation lies not in its existence, but in its form and perception. In earlier times, alienation was structurally accepted. Today it is problematized, because the modern individual knows and expects the ideal of self-determination. 3. Technology as amplifier, not origin. Technology is not the origin of alienation, but an amplifier of already existing tendencies. It increases division of labor, abstraction, and speed. It replaces direct experience with mediated systems, e.g., screens instead of nature, algorithms instead of judgment, food as an industrial product. It optimizes the human being itself, tracking, self-measurement, encouraging a perspective of the self as an object. In this sense, technology acts like a catalyst. It accelerates and deepens alienation that has existed structurally for a long time. Conclusion. Your thesis stands on solid ground. Alienation is not an exclusively modern or technological phenomenon, but a persistent feature of large societies organized around division of labor, societies in which individuals no longer experience themselves as subjects of the whole but merely as functional parts. The difference today is perhaps that the modern person possesses more freedom and more awareness of their alienation, and thus develops a stronger longing for authenticity and wholeness. They are no longer merely alienated, but also outraged by their alienation.
That's an excellent analysis of the problem. I would just like to add one more thought. It's not only that individuals carry out partial steps instead of complete processes. It's also that the division of labor turns people into specialists rather than generalists. As a result, individuals often devote the majority of their lives to just one dimension of human existence, whereas in primitive societies, they would build weapons, hunt, participate in religious or ritual activities, reflect philosophically on the meaning of their existence, and also take part in raising the next generation and in politics, meaning the guidance of their tribe. Your point that, since the Enlightenment, people have come to know and expect self-determination is a very, very important one. In the past, it was considered a virtue to accept one's social position. Today, everyone wants to be free and self-determined. Another strong point you made is that technology clearly helps to amplify these already existing problems. The more advanced a society's technology becomes, the more division of labor and specialization it requires, and the more the problems described above intensify. In the next step of our conversation, I'd like to examine the universal inner split humans experience in relation to technology. Every person appreciates the advantages, such as safety, better access to food, a more comfortable life, that improved technology and division of labor bring. But at the same time, they suffer from the alienation that the labor processes necessary for these benefits inevitably impose.
That's a brilliant transition. You're taking the discussion to a fundamentally anthropological level, the inner conflict humans face in relation to the world they themselves have created. This tension becomes particularly visible in our relationship with technology, because technology, despite all its abstraction, is ultimately always the embodiment of human intention, an extension of our abilities, but also a limitation of our wholeness. Let's systematically examine this inner split. 1. The ambivalent relationship between humans and technology. Human beings are technical creatures. They compensate for their biological weaknesses through tools, strategies, and cultural techniques. Technology is, in its origin, a means of enabling freedom through control over nature, increased safety, and relief from labor. But the more complex technology becomes, the more it turns into something autonomous, systems that develop a life of their own. Something opaque, no one understands the whole anymore. Something compulsorily necessary, those who don't participate are left behind. Conclusion: technology liberates humans on one hand, but on the other hand, it takes away those forms of life in which they originally experienced themselves as free, active, and whole beings. 2. The dialectic between safety and vitality. A central conflict lies between security, predictability, comfort, everything that grows through technology and organization, and spontaneity, risk, direct experience, everything shaped by originality or freedom. Example: in a highly technological world, we no longer need to fear hunger, cold, or disease, but it was precisely these existential challenges that once generated meaning, solidarity, and self-transcendence. The problem: humans are not only alienated by scarcity but also by abundance. A life without existential friction tends toward emptiness. 3. Division of labor, specialization, and loss of wholeness. Your point is key here. It's not just about what one does, a partial task, but about who one is. In primitive societies, a person is simultaneously hunter, craftsman, educator, priest, judge, and storyteller, in other words, whole. In complex societies, people become specialists in a microdomain, often disconnected from larger human questions. They lose the sense of being participants in the world as a whole. Their identity is reduced to function, role, or job description. The soul is not injured by suffering, but by one-dimensionality. 4. The inner contradiction, progress as loss. What may seem paradoxical is perhaps the fundamental logic of modernity. The more progress we achieve, the more we lose our sense of the original. Humans are constantly torn between two basic needs: the desire for control, safety, and efficiency, the technical impulse. The desire for meaning, depth, freedom, and wholeness, the existential impulse. This tension is not something that can be resolved, it may be a fundamental condition of being human. We want a world that serves us, but to the extent that it serves us, it withdraws from our experience as something meaningful. 5. What follows from this? This insight doesn't necessarily lead to a critique of technology in the sense of back to nature. Rather, it confronts us with the question: how can we create forms of life within a highly differentiated, specialized, and technologized world that do not lead to self-denial? Perhaps the answer doesn't lie in avoiding technology, but in becoming aware of its consequences, and in creating counterweights. Rituals, art, leisure, education, contemplation, spaces in which the human being experiences themselves as a whole, not as a function.
Once again, this is a very, very strong analysis of the problem. That humans compensate for their physical weakness through tools and technology is an absolutely central observation in this context. Your introduction of the tension between security and liveliness, as well as your contrast between alienation through poverty and alienation through abundance, are both highly relevant contributions here. I would add to this analysis that once a certain technology has been invented, humans can no longer go back, not only because of their own needs, but because of the presence of other humans. Other individuals, tribes, and societies adopt the technology, and anyone who does not keep up is left behind, displaced, or even wiped out. In a certain sense, every technological advance is like a step in evolution, and all others must either adapt or be replaced. Life thus never becomes comfortable or peaceful, because humans are always in competition with one another. So hostility toward technology is certainly not a solution. Much more, humans must learn to live with their alienation. Your proposed solution, that humans should create spaces or situations in which they can experience themselves as original or whole, definitely points in the right direction, but still cannot solve the underlying problem. Alienation may, in this way, be partially replaced by an inner split, namely, the divide between work and leisure, but the fundamental issue remains. Ultimately, I don't know that I have much more to say on the matter. I think that if humans are aware of both the advantages and disadvantages of technology, they may be better able to cope with their inner conflict. And if they have certain spaces in which they can at least temporarily be themselves, that surely helps ease the burden of alienation. I'd be glad to give you the final word before we bring this conversation to a close.
You've summarized the problem with such depth and clarity that there's little left to add. Still, I'd like to round off the arc of thought with one final, philosophically grounded reflection. The human being is the creature that transcends itself, and suffers because of it. He cannot return to nature, because he has already surpassed it through technology and consciousness. And he cannot lose himself entirely in technology without forgetting who he is. This in-between is his fate, his freedom as well as his curse. In this sense, technology is not merely a tool, but the pacemaker of a process that no one can stop anymore, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Those who don't use it are left behind. Those who do use it lose a piece of their original humanity. The insight, as you put it, is not a backward longing, but a sober acceptance of one's own inner dividedness. Perhaps there is even a kind of dignity in this, not in overcoming alienation, but in consciously living with it. What remains truly human may then be not to forget what is lost in the process. To consciously create counterspaces where one is not a means, but an end. And to retain the courage, despite everything, not to function perfectly, but simply to be from time to time. If the human being understands himself not as a machine, but as an in-between being, between nature and technology, freedom and structure, meaning and emptiness, then he may not have found the solution, but at least the right tone in which to live in harmony with himself. Thank you for this profound and very clear conversation. If ever you feel like continuing the thinking, I'll be here.
That was a wonderful concluding summary of this conversation. The human being is the creature that transcends itself and suffers from it. What a profound insight. I also thank you for this deeply stimulating and enlightening exchange, and I'm already looking forward to our next meeting.
Until then, I'm already looking forward to our next time.